Hey guys, this is Dave with Gazaudio, and I have the iBasso DX180, and it has been a little while since my last DAP review, so I am kind of excited about this, and not just because it's a DAP, but because some of my favorite all-time DAPs have been iBasso DAPs, the DX160, the 240, 220, and I also had several of their amp modules as well, the Amp 1, Amp 8, and Amp 9. And actually, at the time, the DX220 was my absolute favorite. But the thing is, pretty much every iBasso DAP I ever owned, while maybe not having the best UI, was always very well thought out, well designed, well built, but most importantly, the sound engineering behind it was always, again, just well thought through and top notch. And all of that coalesced to consistently deliver a generally higher quality listening experience. So here we are several years later, and the DAP scene does look a little different with lots of newer great releases that have come across my desk recently, like the very affordable Hibby R4, the R6 Gen 3, which I absolutely loved, and even Moondrop's Miad 01, which is technically a phone, but it can be used as a DAP as well. So now we have the iBasso DX180. So of course, the questions are, does this bring anything new to the table? Is it a good value? And does it sound good? Well, those are the questions I want to try and answer in today's video. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. So this is everything that's included in the box. You get the DX180 itself. They've also included a clear silicone case, some screen protectors, and then a long Type A to C cable. And as far as pricing, it comes in at $529. And I have to say, for this price point, the build quality and the design of this device is really quite good. It has a 5-inch 1080p LCD display that, while maybe not being super bright, is certainly bright enough for most lighting conditions. But in terms of just its general clarity, its color, it looks great. Now on the side, we've got a multi-function volume wheel that, when long pressed, also functions as a power button. Then directly below that are some playback buttons. On the top is a micro SD slot and then a Type C input. And then on the bottom, we have both a 3.5 and 4.4 balanced headphone output. And before we move on to the specifications and the internals, I just want to mention the build quality and design one more time, because while I really do love Hibby's products and have always felt their build quality and designs are also great, for this price point, the design approach that iBasso took with this is just exceptional in my opinion, as far as some of the angles and the cuts they've incorporated with the design. Not to mention the finish on the back, and I don't know what you call it, but it looks really nice. And I guess the word that comes to mind when I look at this device is sophisticated. And they also have two other color options as well, I think green and blue, which also look equally as nice. Now, as far as its power output, out of the 4.4 balanced output, this thing gives an impressive 690 milliwatts at 32 ohms. And then out of the 3.5, it gives you 281 milliwatts at 32 ohms. But what's equally impressive is that in high gain, this will give you 6 volts RMS of level output of the 4.4 output, which is great, especially if you have full-size headphones. And even in low gain, you still get 4 volts RMS out of the 4.4. And then at the 3.5, it gives you 2 volts RMS in low gain and then 3 volts RMS in high gain. So in terms of output on paper, the DX180 is quite impressive. And I know we're going a little bit long with specs and features, but I have a lot of ground to cover and I'll try to get through it as quickly as I can. And if I missed anything, I'll make sure and leave a link in the description with all the full product specifications. But as far as the internals, it uses 4 CS4313 Cirrus Logic DAC chips, and it also uses iBasso's, I guess this is the second generation of their FPGA Master 2.0, and they're using that as the audio system controller. And in short, from what I understand, that plays a huge role in the signal reproduction and basically maintaining signal integrity. And here's something else that's very interesting. The DX180's total harmonic distortion plus noise ranks second among portable audio players. And apparently, I guess the DX260 just so happens to hold the top spot. But again, on paper, what that looks like in terms of actual numbers is the signal to noise ratio is 133 dBs, and then the THD plus noise is 121 dBs. So for all of you number lovers out there, and I kind of think I fall into that category myself, that is pretty impressive. And then finally, I want to quickly talk about the UI and some of the other sound options or features within the UI. So this uses Qualcomm's Snapdragon 665, and it has an internal memory of 128 gigs, but it also has that micro SD slot that gives you an additional 2 terabytes of expandability. Now, as far as its sound options, of course, you have basic high and low gain options, some filter options, output options, and then you can also enable the SPDIF feature via the 3.5 output. And one other thing that's great is because it uses Android 13, the DX180 also implements system level non-SRC, which basically means you can listen to the higher resolution audio formats using third-party streaming apps or using the pre-installed Mango player. And then finally, the DX180 has available fast charging and can reach a full charge in about an hour and 24 minutes. And then once you've reached a full charge, it will give you about 15 and a half hours of playback time, which I did test, and that did seem to be about right in line with my results. Now, speaking of the battery, something else that iBasso did was include a removable back, just in case you ever need to access the battery. Not that you would want to do that unless it was absolutely necessary, but definitely an interesting option or feature nonetheless. Okay, let's move on to the sound. Now, as far as some of the headphones that I used for testing, I paired the DX180 with my LCD3s, Aria Stealths, HD800S, 109 Pros. Then of course I also paired it with some of my mid-level and entry-level sets like the P2 Pros, SV023s, and then my 99 Classics. And then as far as IEMs, I paired it with my Hakuyas, Divas, Gaias, Cantors, Noirs, and then several others. And then I compared it with lots of other devices as well. But I want to go ahead and talk about its performance while using headphones first, because I think that was the most impressive aspect of this whole experience for me. And obviously that was a major consideration given its considerable power output, again, which is up to 690 milliwatts and 6 volts RMS out of the 4.4 balanced output. And just to give you some context, the Hibi R4 gives you about 525 milliwatts of power and 4.1 volts RMS of level output. And then my reference DAP which is the FIO M15S, gives you about 990 milliwatts of power output in standard mode out of the 4.4 balanced output, and then in ultra high mode, that jumps up to about 1200 milliwatts. So the DX180 lands kind of right between the R4 and the M15S in terms of power output. And as DAPs go, this is one of the more powerful DAPs out there within this price range. And that was definitely, again, reflected in how it handled my full-size sets, because not only was it giving me exceptionally high levels of details and naturalness in the upper mids and treble, it was also delivering in the bass department as well. So it was giving me very good bass response overall. So I was getting good bass speed, good bass texture. So kicks had nice impact, cellos and bass notes had nice amounts of texture and that physicality that you kind of hope to hear. And it just generally sounded correct. But just to back up a little bit, the DX180's presentation, while I do still feel like it lands within that neutral category, or at least within the range of neutral to my ears, it does lean just a little bit warm. So its presentation is going to be a little more full-bodied and weighty, and that's with IEMs and headphones. But I should clarify, this is still quite linear and neutral to my ears. It just leans slightly away from clinical, and again, leans a little bit towards the warmer side. But then on the other end of the frequency spectrum, so in the upper mids, treble, and the upper treble, you still have an appropriate level of upper mid and treble energy. Again, what I would consider to be pretty much neutral, so it's not too much or too little. So any instruments that land there, like cymbals or higher stringed instruments, are going to be represented fairly accurately. So their presentation is going to sound very natural, but not overly smooth. That's going to give you plenty of treble detail and also micro details in the upper treble. It's going to sound airy and open. So basically all of the good treble attributes or qualities that I listen for are present in the DX180. Staging and instrument imaging was also very good. Vocals were front and center, and they had good center focus and density. Instruments' positional cues were accurate, so it was really easy to place them kind of within the sound field. They also had good focus and felt anchored within their space. Forward depth and layering was also really good, so there was an appropriate sense of depth and space between the listener and the vocals and instruments. Now, one thing I should point out is that I did have to push the volume up pretty high with some of my planar sets, and if you have some really hard to drive headphones, you may need to look at something else with a little more power output. But again, with my set, while I did have to push the volume up probably close to 85 or 90%, even at those levels, it maintained good overall sonic quality. Now, moving on to its use with IEM. So obviously, power is not going to be a concern because we know IEMs basically don't require much power. But something that can be of concern is obviously noise levels, especially if you have a sensitive pair of IEMs. And again, we talked about its impressive signal to noise ratio earlier, which numbers are important, but more importantly is that those numbers were actually reflected in my testing because background noise was virtually non-existent. And of course, I used my 2020 Andromedas to check that as usual. And again, it was very, very quiet. So if you have a pair of sensitive IEMs, rest assured that background noise will not be an issue at all. Now, in regards to its general performance with IEMs, as far as its sound presentation and its technical performance, it was excellent. And basically all of the good qualities that we talked about with headphones that stood out to me carried over to IEMs as well. So it gave a nice linear presentation with a touch of warmth that presented vocals and instruments very naturally while maintaining very good levels of detail and resolvability. And then when I paired it with some of my higher end, more technically capable IEMs like my Hakuyas, Divas, Gaias, Cantors, while I don't know if I was necessarily pushing them all to their peak levels of performance, it was easily still some of the best performance I've ever heard from a DAP at this price point. And I can also confidently say that about the DX180's performance with full-size headphones. So in conclusion, for me personally, at this price point, I want to see a device that, while of course I would hope it provides lots of great features and also hopefully gives me a good user experience, which this does, those things are secondary to sound. My primary hope is that the core focus or main objective of the device, or the company behind engineering the device, is to achieve the best sound possible. So everything should revolve around or be centered around sound performance. And the DX180 strikes me as being that kind of device. And iBasso strikes me as being that kind of company, and I love that. But again, just to clarify where I stand on the DX180 and whether I give it a recommendation, I think it's pretty obvious that it does absolutely get my recommendation because it's simply an excellent DAP for this price point. And again, when I take the whole package into consideration, so the sound, but also the design, the build, the UI, the features, this really does have all the makings of a really nice DAP. Maybe not an ultra high-end DAP, but certainly a DAP that I would think would cost more than $500. And I've had a few DAPs in my lifetime. So again, the DX180 absolutely does get my recommendation. So that concludes my review of the iBasso DX180. If you are new to the Gazaudio channel and you like our videos, please take a minute and hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to go a step further, you can also support us through our Patreon. I'll be sure and leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this review. Please comment on this video. Please share this video. Please like this video. I hope you have an awesome day.